All right, welcome back. When you picture a scientific genius, what comes to mind? Probably someone super logical, super rigorous, all about the cold, hard facts, right? But what if I told you that the most important tool for discovery isn't a supercomputer, but a sense of beauty? Today, we're going to dive into the mind of the incredible Henri Poincaré to find out.
I know, it sounds a little out there, doesn't it? We're all taught that science is about objectivity, about leaving emotions at the door. But the great mathematician Henri Poincaré, he argued that at the very core of scientific discovery, there's something much, much deeper, something almost artistic.
And this quote, man, it just perfectly captures this myth we have of the scientist as just a tireless collector of every single fact they can find. But Poincaré's whole point is that the number of facts in the universe is literally infinite. You couldn't possibly collect them all. So, if science isn't about gathering all the facts, then what in the world is it about?
Well, for Poincaré, the answer boils down to one simple word: selection. He believed a scientist's real job isn't to just gather facts, but to choose which ones actually matter. And the compass they used to make that choice? It's a search for what he called intellectual beauty. And this really gets to the heart of the problem, doesn't it? When you're faced with just an infinite sea of information, how do you even know where to start? What makes one fact more interesting or more worthy of study than another? It can't just be random. And as we're going to see, it's not always about what's immediately useful either.
So what guides them? Poincaré says it's an aesthetic sense. Scientists, he noticed, are drawn to simple facts because their elegance, their simplicity, often means they're going to pop up again and again in nature. And they're also drawn to vast facts, the mind-boggling scale of the cosmos or the tiny, intricate world of an atom, because their sheer scope is just beautiful. In both cases, the thing pulling them forward is a sense of beauty.
And this quote really brings it all home. We're not talking about what just looks pretty on the surface. We're talking about a deeper harmony, an underlying order to the universe. For Poincaré, chasing after this intellectual beauty is what gives science its real power, and in the end, its certainty.
Okay, so if a sense of beauty is the compass, how does that actually work inside our brains? This is where it gets really interesting. Poincaré had this fascinating theory about the mechanism of discovery itself, and he saw it as a kind of journey deep into our own subconscious mind. And here we are again with that key word, selection. Look, a computer could churn out millions upon millions of mathematical combinations, right? But almost all of them would be complete and utter garbage. The real genius of discovery isn't about creating endless possibilities. It's about filtering out all the useless ones to find the single one that's actually meaningful. It's about discernment. And get this, Poincaré himself was the perfect example. He totally shattered the stereotype. He flat out admitted he was a terrible calculator and that he'd be a horrible chess player. Why? Because his mind didn't work by just brute force memorization. No, his memory was guided by a feeling, an intuition for the overall harmony and structure of an idea. Now, to explain how this works, he came up with this really cool concept, the subliminal ego. That was his name for the subconscious. He pictured it as this incredible engine, just constantly and blindly creating countless combinations of ideas, all working away way below the surface of our awareness.
But wait a second. If the subconscious is just blindly making combinations, what stops it from just flooding our conscious mind with total nonsense? Well, Poincaré believed that the subliminal ego acts like a very, very fine sieve.
So what are the holes in the sieve made of? You guessed it, our aesthetic sensibility. He argued that only the combinations that are harmonious, the ones that are useful and ultimately beautiful, only those are able to pass through this filter and suddenly pop into our conscious mind. That's the aha moment. It's the beautiful ideas that grab our attention. Now, thinking about science this way, as this deeply human, creative process, it has some really radical implications. It forces us to completely rethink some of the most fundamental ideas we have about reality itself, starting with things like chance and space. So, let's take chance. We usually think of it as pure randomness, like a roll of the dice. But for Poincaré, chance is really just a measure of our own ignorance. It's what happens when a tiny, tiny cause that we can't possibly perceive produces a massive, unpredictable effect. His analogy of a cone balanced perfectly on its tip is just brilliant. The slightest unmeasurable vibration is what determines which way it falls. For him, that is chance.
And here's a seriously powerful way to think about that idea. A microscopic deviation in a single cell, a cause so small it's basically unknowable, could have prevented the birth of Napoleon. And just like that, the entire history of Europe is different.
That is the true power and nature of chance. And he applied the same human-centered thinking to the idea of space. The whole notion of a fixed absolute grid just existing out there in the universe was, for him, basically meaningless. Instead, he argued that space is something our mind constructs relative to our own body. Our body is the origin point. It's the coordinate system we use to make sense of the world.
So that gut feeling you have of what a straight line is, according to Poincaré, that's not some mystical connection to a perfect external truth. It's just your brain's awareness of the muscle movements you'd need to make to follow that line with your eyes or trace it with your finger. This entire sense of space was built up over millions of years of evolution. It's a survival tool that was, as he put it, conquered by the race.
So what does all of this actually mean for us? Let's bring these huge philosophical ideas back down to earth and see how Poincaré's way of thinking has some really profound implications for how we should be teaching and learning science today. And this right here is his core message for education. For anyone to truly, deeply understand a concept, they first need to feel it. They need to get it intuitively. The rigid, logical proof, all the formulas, that stuff only makes sense after you have that intuitive grasp of the idea itself.
He explained this with this brilliant construction metaphor. You start with a simple, tangible image. That's your scaffolding, like a line drawn with chalk on a board. You use that simple scaffolding to build the complex, logical structure. And only when that structure is solid and complete can you take the scaffolding away. If you just start with abstract rules, the student has no idea what they're even trying to build.
Finally, Poincaré left us with a pretty powerful warning, one that feels more relevant today than ever before. He was afraid that over-specialization would shatter science into these tiny, isolated fragments. And the big risk there is that it prevents what he called unexpected concurrences. You know, those surprising, beautiful connections between different fields where the most profound breakthroughs so often happen. So when you put it all together, what you get is a completely radical rethinking of what science even is. In Poincaré's world, it is not some cold, mechanical task. It's a creative, deeply human adventure. The scientist, in a way, is an artist, guided by an aesthetic sense, searching for the hidden harmony of the universe. And this way of thinking, it's not just for scientists. It's a whole new lens for looking at everything. So I'll just leave you with this question. Where in your own world, your work, your hobbies, your life, can you start looking for that hidden harmony, that little piece of intellectual beauty? Thanks for watching this explainer. Join us again next time as we break down more big ideas from some of the world's most fascinating thinkers.